Hi, this is Casey Kasem. Well, it's been 4 years since the boss himself, Bruce Springsteen, was last on the pop chart. In that time, he got married, had a couple of kids, and is about to release 2 new CDs. And the title track from one of those albums was a big debut on this week's chart. It's called Human Touch, and it's proof positive that Bruce hasn't lost his touch at all. Now, as he returns to the survey, is Bruce Springsteen still the boss? Find out as we count down all the biggest hits in the USA right here on Casey's Top 40.
Casey's biggest hits.
8 years ago this week, back in 1985, one of the biggest hits in the USA was Glory Days by a superstar so opposed to his music being used in commercials that he once turned down $12 million for the use of a single song. Bruce Springsteen is notorious for refusing to sell the rights to any of his songs for use in movies or commercials. Over the years, he said no to some of the biggest directors and producers around. But Bruce must have had to swallow hard when he was contacted by the chairman of Chrysler, Lee Iacocca. Iacocca offered Bruce $12 million for the right to use the song Born in the USA in a series of commercials. But true to his principles, Bruce said no. A $12 million no.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the song Streets of Philadelphia. It's by a superstar who once sold a pair of his old boots at a charity auction for $8,000. But he'd never pay that much. He likes to buy his boots used for just a small fraction of that. Like a lot of celebrities, Bruce Springsteen is often asked to contribute some item of clothing or memorabilia to charity. Not long ago, Bruce was asked by the American Foundation for AIDS Research, AMFAR, to give something for them to auction to raise funds. So he went through his closet, and he decided the proper item would be a well-worn pair of cowboy boots. And Bruce was right. The boots sold for $8,000, twice what any other celebrity item went for. Bruce says he was amazed to discover that his boots had gone for $8,000 because he likes to buy his boots for a lot less. Whenever he can, he goes to the Fairfax district of L.A. There's a particular cowboy shop there that has a special sale every Sunday, a sale where they line up pair after pair of used boots right on the sidewalk. Bruce loves to join the crowds that shop there because he hates to break in a new pair of boots. It takes too long, and it can really hurt. So he buys well-broken-in used boots, and he says he rarely pays more than $30. This week, the man who buys his boots on the streets of Los Angeles is singing about the streets of a city almost 3,000 miles away.
Casey's Top 40.
Now we're up to the latest hit for a rock superstar who got his first big break by pestering his sister and her boyfriend. It all happened back in 1965 when Bruce Springsteen was a skinny 15-year-old growing up in Freehold, New Jersey. He was a teenager with a big dream of becoming a big rock star. But no one would take him seriously. He'd tried starting a couple of garage bands with friends, but those friends turned out to be just goof-offs. They didn't have the commitment that Bruce had. He kept banging on Rock's front door, but nobody answered. Then Bruce's older sister, Ginny, started going out with a guy named George Thies. And it turned out George was a musician. He was in a local band called the Castiles. And when Bruce found out, he wanted to be part of that band. Every time George would drop by the house to pick up Ginny, Bruce would beg him for a chance. But George kept saying, "No way, kid." When George wasn't around, Bruce pestered his sister to put some pressure on George to give him a chance. And finally, just to get him out of his hair, George gave in. He got Bruce an audition with the band's manager, a man named Tex Vineyard. On the appointed day, Bruce showed up at Tex's garage and played him a couple of songs that he'd written. Tex was prepared to reject the kid flat out. But when he heard Bruce play, he thought there was something there. He had Bruce audition a second time so the rest of the band could judge for themselves. And they thought there was something there too. So they let Bruce in on a trial basis. Bruce began his career with the Castiles playing dances at the YMCA, then at clubs in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And when he formed his own band, he moved on to bigger clubs, launching one of the most remarkable careers of the rock era. A career that began when he pestered his older sister and her boyfriend. These days, that career is still going strong, and the boss recently collected his very first Oscar for this poignant song.
The hits from coast to coast.
With the hottest stars, their songs and stories, it's American Top 40 with The Shadow. Now here's a great story. How a college student saved Bruce Springsteen's career. Okay, back in 1974, Bruce was just a cult hero. The couple of albums he released on Columbia Records were critical successes, but they hadn't sold real well. He was working on his third album and came up with a song that he knew would be the best on the album, so Bruce took a lot of time and care recording it. When executives at Columbia heard it, they were angry. They were actually angry. They didn't like the way it sounded and didn't think it had a chance as a single, so Columbia held back the money to complete the rest of the album. Well, Bruce was angry, livid. He canceled his studio time and went back on the road to play clubs and colleges on the East Coast. Now, before one of those shows at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, Bruce sat down with a reporter from the school's paper. He told the reporter that he thought the president of Columbia Records wanted to drop him from the label. Now, the president at that time was a guy named Erwin Siegelstein. And it just so happened that Siegelstein's 20-year-old son was a Springsteen fan and a student at Brown. He read Bruce's interview in the university paper and immediately called home. He said, "Dad, you're not really going to drop Bruce, are you?" Well, because of his son's complaints, Siegelstein reconsidered the album. Bruce and his band began recording it again, and they finished in 1975. And the song that Bruce thought was his best, that almost lost him his record contract, became the album's title track and Bruce Springsteen's classic signature song, Born to Run. That's a great story, huh? Now, the title track from one of his two new albums is at number 34 this week on AT40. Here's Human Touch. You're tuned to the pulse of pop, American Top 40. I'm Shadow Stevens. And now let's find out why major rock stars are among the celebrities going out of their way to keep a television show on the air. And it's not a TV show about music. It's a real-life drama, a weekly news magazine on public TV called South Africa Now. The show looks at the racism and oppression going on in South Africa. The producer, Carolyn Craven, is a former White House correspondent for National Public Radio, and she says, South African censorship has driven the apartheid story off our TV screens, and now South Africa Now is getting the story out. The TV show is nonprofit and only runs because of contributions and grants. And supporters include some of the biggest names in rock music like Bruce Springsteen, members of U2 and Jackson Browne who've donated their time and money. Bruce Springsteen says, "I don't think you can sit and watch TV and see the injustice there without wanting to do something in some fashion about it." Now, if you want to know more about it, you can write the nonprofit tax-exempt Africa Fund. 198 Broadway, New York, New York, 10038.
Music.
Bruce Springsteen has been pretty busy lately. He and his band performed 2 sold-out benefit shows at New Jersey's Meadowlands with some special appearances. Appearances from E Street Band members Clarence Clemens, Max Weinberg, and Miami Steve. And he showed up as David Letterman's surprise guest on the final late night. And he recorded a duet with his wife, Patti Scialfa, called As Long As I Can Be With You for her debut, Rumble Doll. And that would be enough for a regular guy, but not for the boss. He and his wife still found time to conceive their third child, due sometime in March. This fall, MTV will pull the plug on Bruce Springsteen. That's right, I guess now that the once elusive pop star has broken the ice with his TV performance on Saturday Night Live, the boss has now decided to take a shot at MTV Unplugged. And if all goes according to plan, Bruce will release it on CD for Christmas. The Stone Pony in Asbury Park was the launching pad for a lot of local Jersey bands into rock and roll stardom. So it was only right that the most famous of them all came back to wish the club a happy 20th anniversary. Bruce Springsteen showed up unannounced the night of July 16th during the band's celebration to jam with his old cronies, Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. He also brought along his wife, Patti Scialfa, Pony alumni John Bon Jovi, and former E Street drummer Max Weinberg. Together they all joined Southside on stage for a night of great music. You're with the Shadow on a musical climb to number 1. A couple of listeners wrote in to find out who holds the dubious distinction of having the most top 10s without ever hitting number 1. Well, Pauline and Mike, his biggest album had 7 top 10 hits, and if you add another 4 more from other albums, he's had a total of 11 top 10s, but Bruce Springsteen has never hit number 1.
Casey's biggest hits.
7 years ago this week, back in 1987, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by Bruce Springsteen, a song in which the boss tried to make sense of his crumbling marriage. I'll have details and that big hit after this.
Casey's biggest hits.
7 years ago this week, back in 1987, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by Bruce Springsteen, a song in which the boss tried to make sense of his crumbling marriage. It was back in 1987 that Bruce Springsteen's 2-year-old marriage to actress Julianne Phillips was on the rocks. It had seemed so right, and it had turned so wrong. As a songwriter, Bruce was used to working out his feelings in his songs, and so he conceived an album called Tunnel of Love. It was all about the ways that love can turn into something other than it seems at first. At the heart of the album was a song about the way that in a relationship, people often pretend to be something other than they are. And 7 years ago this week, that song was one of the biggest hits in the USA. Here's Bruce Springsteen singing from his heart on Brilliant Disguise.
Casey's biggest hits.
16 years ago this week, back in 1980, one of the biggest hits in the USA was the first top 10 hit for Bruce Springsteen after a contractual dispute shut down his career for years. I'll have details and that big hit after this.
Casey's biggest hits.
16 years ago this week, back in 1980, one of the biggest hits in the USA was the first top 10 hit for Bruce Springsteen after a contractual dispute shut down his career for years. It was in 1975 that Bruce Springsteen was on the covers of both Newsweek and Time, the very same week. It should have been the start of an incredible career. But instead, Bruce became tangled up in a dispute with his manager that kept him from releasing any new albums until close to the end of the decade. It wasn't until the late 70s that Bruce finally got his career back on track. And it wasn't until 1980 that he scored with his first top 10 appearance after that dispute, with a song that was one of the biggest hits in the USA 16 years ago this week.
Casey's Top